All right. Hello. Um, this video is supposed to help you with actually starting to layout sketch. So layout sketching in general is a basically very minimally sketching out a mechanism or a system mechanisms on a 2D plane, meaning that you do not create any 3D parts when layout sketching. This is like the first thing I will tell you. Please do not make any parts in your layout sketch. If you look at the layout sketch for Pablo, basically no 3D parts at all. Literally no 3D part. You can ignore that. That's for prototyping. But if I see a 3D part in your part studio, I will slap you. Not even joking about that. That's the first rule. Never, ever, ever do 3D parts. Um, so how simple is layout sketching? As you can see here, it is quite literally the simplest thing you can ever imagine. This is what some a line here, some text, a rectangle, circles. You literally just have to use lines, rectangles, circles, and sketch constraints or functions like such as mirrors. You do not need to be using like you do not need to be creating whole patterns for box tubes. I'm telling you already that is going in way too deep, and you do not want to do that because that's going to slow your laptop down, and it's gonna make you want to jump off the balcony. Yeah, please don't do that. Um, So layout sketching helps us visualize the robot in a simple form, just lines. Imagine if this was 3D, it would absolutely make everything a mess. This is literally the simplest you can think about your bot. Um, Very easy to look at, very easy to understand when someone explaining it to you. Just overall, just a very easy second step. I'll explain why it's a second step in the build season, but second step in creating the robot. Um, so let's see. Moving on, and yes, I do have a script because I'm a bum. Um, so where do does layout sketching fall in the build season? That is a great question. I would say layout sketching is probably the second or third thing. Well, out now, second thing we do in the build season for design. The first thing is actually to draw out ideas. If you remember me, Sean, Jeff, Chris, Kalash, the whole gang, we would kind of just dip P1 and go to room 72. We quite literally just sat in a circle around the table and had like four whiteboards, and we would just start sketching out ideas. You do not, please, and I'm telling you, it's like the second thing I tell you not to do. Do not go into layout sketching without anything drawn out. It's gonna make your life such a pain because you won't know where to even start. Um, so and like you generally want to have every single idea that that you've drawn out layout sketched. So if you see in our folders, we have lots and lots and lots of layout sketches. Um, we had a total of about 8 archetypes. Um, Archetypes, the definition of archetypes is like, well, I'm going to say archetype, the singular form. Archetype is a layout sketch for a singular robot. So we had about 8 archetypes the past season. So why did we turn the robot over very late to software? Well, that is because we took a lot of time deciding which archetype to pursue. Um, that is where prototyping plays its role because prototypes help us a lot in the decisions that we make in our layout sketches. I will explain that later on as well. Um, so why do we do layout sketches? Layout sketching is, as I said before, very, very simple, and it helps you visualize approximately how your robot will interact with the game piece. I say approximately because, of course, we do not have all of Albert Einstein's Newton's second law, Ohm's law modeled out in the sketch. No, we just very minimalistically try to include some form of simple physics in the layout sketches. Um, so this means that when you make layout sketches, you want to include every major position that the game piece will be inside your bot. So, for example, for last year, we modeled out the coral, the game piece that our robot was intending to manipulate, from the human station right here. then falling into the funnel, going through the handoff. We actually had two layout sketches for going through the handoff here, and then going through the handoff here, and then actually hitting the hard stop, and then going all the way up, being inside, still inside of the outtake, and then shooting out and scoring it. So, in essence, you want to layout sketches really help us visualize how our robot interact with the game piece. You want to make sure that in your layout sketch, you sketch out the game piece or the robot interacting with the game piece from the moment the game piece is still on the floor or still in the human player station, all the way to when you're done manipulating it, in this case, scoring. Um, so now we're actually going into the nitty-gritty stuff. How to layout sketch. Your very first layout sketch should be from the side view, as you see here. This will be like the main plane that you layout sketch in, and please make it consistent with the plane here. Don't make your side the front view. I will also personally come over and slap you. It makes catting a lot easier because then when people say it from the front and you press the front and that's actually your right view, or like you're like, oh shoot, we messed up. Anyway, again, make it consistent with the planes. Um, so the you want before you start layout sketching, you want to have a general idea of how your robot looks. If this is either like in your mind or you have like drawings laid out. If you go into layout sketches and have no clue where to start, that means that you probably did not sketch out your robot on literally just a piece of paper. And you don't have to be Picasso to do this. Literally, just like draw some square lines, side view, isometric view, whatever you want. Just have the robot down very simply on a piece of paper, just so you know what you're going for. Um, so for Pablo, or Poblano, I'm going to call it Pablo. For Pablo, I like already knew what I was going for, and I had an idea of what I wanted the elevator to do, what I wanted the outtake to look like, that type of stuff. To visualize it, it's not like you have every single dimension down. You just want to have a general idea of it. The specific dimensions will be obtained then from prototyping. Um, so moving on, let's talk about the order of layout sketching. When layout sketching, you want to create the mechanisms in the same order of how the game piece interacts with the robot or how the robot interacts with the game piece. So, for example, since the bot actually has to go to the game piece first to collect it, you want to create the drive base first. And then since the bot has to pick up the game piece somehow, you have to, your next sketch will be the intake. And then since the bot has to travel through, or since the coral has to or Jesus, since the game piece has to travel through your bot, you want to sketch your handoff next, so on, so on. So then it's going to be the outtake here, maybe some elevator, whatnot. So in this case, it was the drive base and then the funnel, since that's the next thing that the coral interacts with, and then the handoff and then the outtake and then the elevator. So you want to again kind of make it from the ground up. um but before creating and layout sketching your drive base and other mechanisms, you actually want to create the field elements and the limits for the game. um this is very important. Actually, make sure you include the ground. It visually just helps you contemplate everything. Um, I usually just coincident it to the origin, but yeah, make the ground first. What I would do is I would actually make the field elements and the limits in two separate sketches. Hell, I would even like make every single field element in a separate sketch, so then you can hide certain sketches and whatnot, just to organize your space better. As we'll talk later, organization is very, very important when layout sketching. So yeah, keep that in mind. Um, so after you create the field elements and the height restrictions, the extension limits, that type of stuff, your next layout sketch will be the drive base. Um, this is where designing with intent comes into play. You will you will have to design with a lot of intent when you're layout sketching, because you want to make sure that your layout sketches have changeable geometry, easily changeable geometry. This means that if you change one dimension, like your whole screen does not become red. Um, so you really like layout sketches are really prone to changes, such as I don't know, compression, maybe like the height of the elevator, maybe how far the outtake is from the edge of the frame, that type of stuff. So you really want to make sure that basically every single part of your robot that is suspect to change is changeable without creating any errors to the rest of your layout sketches. Um, to make sure that everything is changeable, as I said before, you don't really want to be using your dimension tool for everything. You want to make sure you're using geometric constraints like vertical, horizontals, that type of stuff. But if you know that a part or a mechanism or some sort of dimension or like some sort of distance on your robot is prone to change, you sometimes do want to use the dimension tool instead, just so you can easily change that distance. Um, yeah. And again, I know this will all sound probably very confusing at first, but trust me, once you actually just start practicing layout sketches, it will become a lot more understandable and stuff. Yeah. Also, I kind of suck at explaining this. So anyway, all right. Now to make your layout sketches, your layout sketch geometry changeable, you want to be using variable studios. So if you see here, we actually totally use a lot of variable studios, one for each separate mechanism. So for example, we have a variable studio for the drive base, we have an end effector variable studio, we have an elevator variable studio, that type of stuff. Um, so in this case, since we were talking about the drive base, you really do need to use a variable studio for the drive base because most likely your frame parameter it will change. Um, you guys should remember how to use the variable studio. If not, it's very, very simple. Just, do it a couple times, you'll be fine. But yeah, this is very useful because instead of like scouring your UI just to find one dimension, you can just kind of you can just be like over here and be like, oh yeah, let me just change this to like 24 or whatnot. And another really big variable you want in the variable studio is compression because your compression will most likely change. It changed a couple times for us this past season, so it will probably change many times for the next seasons or to come. Yep, that makes sense. Um, and another thing for compression, if people say like for example, half-inch compression, that means half-inch compression in total. It doesn't mean half-inch compression on one wheel. It's half-inch compression with both wheels. So that can mean 0.25 on one wheel, 0.25 on the other. You get the gist. Um, and when making the drive base layout sketch, please, please, please use a mirror tool. It will save you so much time in creating this concoction. This goes for the rest of the mechanisms. Whenever you can, please like find ways to simplify things, to simplify the ways to create something. It will save a lot of time and a lot of pain. And to get good at that, you just need to practice making more layout sketches and honestly just making more things in general. Um, Also, note for the drive base next season, we'll be using new sort modules. These are the MK5Ns. There you go. I'll talk about these more during training season, but if you do want to take a look, go for it. I'll tell the main difference right now. These are lower than the MK4Is. They also use an X44 and an X60, whereas the MK4I used both X60s, so they're way less. And also, there's no belt, so it's just all gear-to-gear interaction, and it's very easy to change the gear ratio. You can read more if you want, and you can ask questions whenever you want. So, how deep should you go when layout sketching? As I said before, layout sketches should not be deep at all. This means please do not make every single box tube a hole pattern. Um, just make sure that your box tubes are nice lengths. This means 22.25, 23.5, 23, that type of stuff. Don't make it like 23.1, blah, 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 whatever, right? Um, this also means that you do not want to sketch every bolt in existence on the bot. But if you do have like a spot where it's a tight space and you want to make sure that a bolt fits in that tight space, then that's where it's worth layout sketching. the bolt. And that's a bit of an uncommon scenario. You like please like again, don't layout sketch every single bolt in existence on the bot paint. Um, but you also do not want to make it too simple. So, for example, for this elevator, you don't want to just make it this one line because like people just won't know what they're looking at and it'll be really confusing. Here, as you see, we actually use just rectangles and a line to demonstrate where the like how the elevator is traveling. Um, and when layout sketching, you generally just want to include the max dimensions of anything that might be on the bot. That helps you with where to place your other mechanisms and where you have space on the bot. That type of stuff just makes life more easier. Um, this is also why clearance is, again, very important in CAD. You don't want to make anything one-to-one. You always want space, right? Um, and let's just say you are making like a very oblong object, like for example, let me just pull up some like let's just say you're making some really weird component that has like a lot of curves and whatnot. But I'll just sketch something out real quickly. Like let's just say it has a, I don't know, an arc there, it has a line there, boom, something like that, right? What you could do is you could quite literally just get a rectangle and represent the max dimensions of this thing with the rectangle, and you'll be absolutely fine. Um, you don't really, again, you don't really want to get too deep with this. You just want to make sure that you're covering the entire dimension of the object and you have clearance for it. So, I mentioned before that in layout sketching, we layout sketch every single possible orientation that the game piece could be in. You also want to do this with the every mechanism on the bot. So for example, for last year's bot, we included every single, well, for last year's bot, for the elevator at least, we included the orientation for when it's powered off and when it's underneath the starting height limit, for when it's supposed to be taking the handoff from the funnel, and for when it's supposed to be scoring on L4, and also for when it's supposed to be dealginating. Now, why didn't we layout sketch it scoring? Well, we also did layout sketch it scoring on L1, but why didn't we layout sketch it scoring onto L2 or L3? Well, that's because if it can score on L4, it can score on L2, and it can score on L3, right? So there's no use in making that layout sketch. Um, for L1, we weren't sure if we wanted to pursue it, so we decided not to layout sketch it, pretty sure. I also might be wrong. I haven't looked at this doc in ages. But again, generally, we would want to layout sketch the robot scoring into L1 from the funnel because we were scoring from the funnel. Um, when layout sketching, you will need to be referencing data sheets or just I forgot what they're called, like the PDFs with the dimensions of components. Specifically for larger like COTS mechanisms, like for example, last year I would heavily reference the WCP a cascade elevator on-sheet document just to make sure that all of my dimensions for the elevator make sense and that we weren't going over the starting height limit at its resting position. Um, when so I don't know if you guys took a look at the continuous elevator I've been working on, but when making this continuous elevator, I actually did look at the data sheets for uh, the elevator blocks here. So these are supposed to be the elevator blocks. I'll just quickly show you guys that. Swerve specialties. So I was making my design off of these specific ones, and I had to look at their data sheet to get their dimensions down. And as you can see here before, they do have some really weird curves in the edges here, but I just represented their max dimensions as a rectangle. So yeah, so just keep that in mind. You like again, you will have to reference the data sheets for different components. Um, and So I already referenced document organization for layout sketching. This is really, really important. You do not want your layout sketch document to be messy because if your layout sketch document is messy, then most likely the rest of your documents for every single mechanism will be messy. Um, so this year we used a lot of folders, which still turned out to be messy, but it's a lot better from past years. What I would look into is I would look into using branches. So if you go here and you right click on, for example, version 41, you can say branch to create workspace, and that'll create a new branch, and you'll be able to create new layout sketches there. I would experiment with that. I might take a look at it later and tell you guys if it works out. But again, organization is very, very important. Um, and so while I was in Houston, I attended an Onshape conference where they talked about um, top-down layout sketching. What I mean by this is that you kind of want your bot to be represented in a 3D kind of 3D-ish kind of representation already in your layout sketch. So as you see here, these are all 2D sketches, but you can see like a kind of like a 3D representation of the bot already. A better example for this, I would say, is the elevator that I've been working on. As you hear, like you can see the elevator blocks exactly where they're supposed to be. You can see that the box tubes are have the side view and also the front view represented. I also think I have the inside of the boxes represented and the pulleys and whatnot, as well as from here. So you want to make sure that you cover the max dimension that a component takes or a mechanism takes in the not only the side view, but also the top view and the back view. Um, I'm gonna, here, there's a actually really good um, slideshow for that. I'll probably link that later, but very, very useful to later on because it really helps you in creating the mechanisms and just helps you visualize them easier. To do this, you will have to use a lot of plane tools. So if you see here, I did use a lot of planes to create these kind of 3D sketches. And you also will have to use a lot of the mirror tool, not in the sketch, but like the actual mirror tool, because yes, you can mirror sketches over a plane. Um, Another thing in layout sketches is you want to make things symmetric. So, for example, for this elevator, I made the middle of it. See this line? This kind of marks the middle of it. I made this line go through the origin point because then I can easily mirror it over the right plane. Um, Same goes for the robot. Please do not create your robot like in freaking Narnia over here. That would be an absolute pain when you're deriving it into another part studio or a document. Um, Now, there will be a lot of times when you're layout sketching and you just genuinely do not know what to dimension something. Um, I would say just guess, right? Like you could also just ask yourself if the mechanisms you're trying to dimension, like if it's gonna be colliding with anything, if it's getting in the way of anything, if it could go outside the frame limit, if you're just wasting material. And if you literally just do not know what to dimension it, it's probably a dimension that you have to prototype, like compression, and you can always ask your mentor for help on the dimension of it. And layout sketching is very kind of free. What I mean by that is it's not really binding. So once you dimension something, it's not gonna stay that dimension most likely. Like it's prone to change. So if you do not know the dimension of something, just do your guess bet or do your best guess and then move on, and you'll probably like likely have to change the dimension later on. Um, so how do you get better at layout sketching? Practice, practice, practice. That is quite literally the only way. Watching this video probably just helped you kind of understand of how to do layout sketching. but in order to actually get better at it, you need to create layout sketches and you need to get feedback on them, either from me, from Jeff, from Sean, whoever you want to ask. Um, I would highly recommend to create a very simple robot layout sketch for either the Crescendo game and quite literally just copy our robot, the one that we created, or I would do 2018 Power Up for the smaller scale. Um, Both of those games should be very simple and should definitely help you get introduced to layout sketching. After you create the layout sketches, I would also highly recommend to actually 3Dify the robot because 3Difying really helps you understand where you went wrong with your layout sketches and helps you get better with both 3Difying and your layout sketches. So yeah, um, hopefully this helped you out with layout sketches a little bit. If it didn't, again, I'm happy to go on call and I'm happy to answer any questions or quite literally just redo this whole video again. Just ping me and yeah.